exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and get going. So today I want to go into eminent way psychology and really from the standpoint of psychology going back to its original meaning, meaning the study of, well, okay, so psyche in Greek is either breath or life force or sometimes related to soul. And so it's the study of the soul is in essence what psychology is. Let me get to, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
Okay. So one of the basic ideas in the eminent way is that we're untapped. We don't use even close to all of our forces and powers that reside within us. And one of the stories that kind of accompanies this is imagining that you live in a beautiful mansion with libraries and art rooms and all kinds of things, all kind of up on the higher stories in there. And we tend to live just in the kitchen and the basement. Meaning, now if you relate that kind of to the lower functions of the system, our moving center and instinctive center and those types of things. And when you tell someone, kind of going back to our story, when you tell someone that they live in this beautiful mansion, sometimes they'll laugh because it's almost inconceivable as far as the sort of powers and forces that are at play in the human complex that we oftentimes don't have access to. And anytime you're dealing with psychology from the traditional standpoint, in other words, the study of the soul, there comes this idea of all these other things that come with it, like clairvoyance, or what about telepathy, or what about any of these sorts of what would be called super psychology or super normal psychology, I should say, in there. But in truth, it's not really practical to begin to study those aspects until we understand more of the fundamental aspects of psychology. It would be equivalent to trying to understand calculus before you have a grasp on basic mathematics, right? There's a natural progression, and we always understand this in the cultural world or in the world of education, that we have this natural progression of learning. But when it's odd to me that when someone begins a spiritual journey, that's where they first land, right? Oftentimes it's like, and it's natural, but we'll talk about the idea of daydreaming versus imagination a little bit later on in this lesson. But yeah, anyway, as a foundation point, we're going to begin by just exploring our own psychology. And psychology is one of those unique things in that you can't study it with a telescope. You can't, go out into the garden and tear psychology apart, or you can't look to the stars and learn about your psychology. It has to come from the inside. And our modern society really lacks, by and large, powerful tools for examining our own psychology and looking inward. And I'll give you an example of this. Every approximately 30 to 50 years, our entire paradigm of psychoanalysis and psychology tends to change. Back in the 70s, 80s, and even a little bit in the 1990s, psychologists used to use techniques that were designed to regress someone back into like childhood trauma, for instance. And that was all the rage back then. It's like, oh, well, what happened to you as a child? Let's take you back kind of hypnotically, let you relive, re-experience those sorts of things. And what the AMA, the American Medical Association, and other kind of bodies that sort of govern this sort of thing started to discover is that there was a huge spike in suicides from utilizing this type of technique. And so that got sort of tossed out the window. It's actually illegal if you're a psychotherapist to, illegal might be a strong term. It is not encouraged as a psychotherapist to do this with your clients. And so now we have things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and so on and so forth. But if you trace the history of psychology back, it's like it's the history of experimenting on the human mind, you know? And so, yeah, so back to my point, we don't really have good techniques for understanding our own inner psychologies. And so the fundamental principles here is that we have to find good techniques to do so, and also understand kind of what might be wrong inside, you know. And when I say wrong, because I'm going to use the term like wrong manufacture, wrong function, those types of things. I don't mean it in the sense of being right and wrong from a moralistic or judgmental point of view. I mean it from the standpoint of function according to natural design. You know, if you have an automobile that's designed to run on gasoline, and you decide to pour kerosene in instead, and then are surprised that it clunks and, you know, doesn't run the way that you intended it to, and all those types of things, that's more like what I mean by wrong according to design. If the machine was designed to run on kerosene, then certainly pour kerosene in there, not gasoline. So does that distinction make sense to everyone so far? Okay. Another fundamental aspect herein is that man is an incomplete being. And for those of you that are that have been to some of the past ones, you'll have a better sense of what I mean by this. But in essence, we're only born 1/3 fixed, 1/3 complete. The other 2/3 are a blank slate as far as we're concerned. And many times when people contemplate the idea of evolution, they're always thinking about physical evolution. You know, maybe humans in the future will be shorter and more leathery, or, you know, more alien-like, or bigger heads, or, I mean, everyone kind of has these imaginations about what the future of humanity might look like. But from this standpoint, what we look like is actually only the necessary biological coat or cloak that can sustain those inner aspects to us, like the soul and the spirit. I am a soul and a spirit. I have a body right now, and this body will eventually perish, and another one, you know, if I happen to reincarnate or recur, another one will come along, and it will be suited towards the conditions of the planet that I happen to live on. If it be Earth, 100 million years from now or something, who knows, right? Who knows what it would look like. But anyway, that's the point of evolution from a human standpoint, is those spiritual forces within yourself that evolve. That's where true evolution actually takes place. And those things require not only knowledge, but also effort. I think I talked about last time the difference between knowledge and being, where a person can, you know, start off and they can acquire a bit of knowledge, and then a bit more knowledge, and a bit more knowledge, and a bit more knowledge, and eventually end up being extremely intellectual, extremely smart, but also very lopsided, because they've never actually applied that knowledge to their being. And so in the Eminent Way, it's a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of effort, and then your being increases, and then you sort of realize, understand, or comprehend what it is that you're lacking, and then you go and apply or grab more knowledge, and so on and so forth in that. So yeah, as long as man knows only what he can know in an ordinary way, evolution for him is impossible. Gosh, there's a very similar quote. Maybe someone here can help me out with that. It's like there's two of them. The first is someone's definition of insanity as trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? It's kind of similar to that. Okay, one concept that I want to share with you is the idea of when you begin to look to observe yourself and to actually examine your inner psychology, somewhat the way a scientist would examine something in the physical world, you'll begin to notice something. You'll come across this idea that we constantly refer to ourselves as I. You know, I'm sitting in a chair, I'm teaching this class, I'm listening to this class, I'm doing this later, I did this yesterday, I. And if you want to get a sense of just how often we talk about ourselves and how often we relate to our own identity, try for half a day or even a full day just to eliminate the word I from your vocabulary and see how many conversations you can successfully have. I've done this. I've actually done this a few times, many times, I should say, in my life as an experiment. And it's incredibly interesting because you begin to realize, first of all, how much you don't actually need to say. If you can't find a way to say something without using the word I, then it's like, okay, do I actually have to say this? Does one have to say this? So you can't even say that without it. And the concept of I is a little bit deceiving because in actuality, we're not one. We have no unity within us. In an undeveloped state, it can be likened to, our lives can be likened to a kingdom wherein the throne has been abdicated and all of the subjects in the kingdom decide to play king for a little while. And so one person sits on the throne and he or she mandates, what's going to happen with the rest of the kingdom. And all the other subjects, seem to think that that's okay. And then he gets kicked out of the throne and a new one takes his place and overrides that mandate and makes brand new mandates. And, we can see this in our lives, like promises that we make to other people, or even promises that we make to ourselves, where we have the best intentions. It can be something simple, like I'm going to get up, start getting up at 4:30 in the morning and meditating, or using time for something, whatever that is. And then, of course, you go to bed with that intention, and that was one king that set that intention. But you wake up in the morning and someone else has woken up and throws the alarm clock across the room and doesn't want that, right? And so this is one of the principal mistakes that we make about ourselves, and it's extremely important to recognize and identify those various I's within ourselves in order to understand our inner psychology. I was going to tell the story about one's day. Uh-oh. Are you guys still with me? Yes?
Yeah, we're here.
Odd. I just got a pop-up on my computer saying that I'm signed out, so that's interesting. At least it's going. I was going to tell the story about one's day, and I think you can kind of imagine this. You wake up in the morning and it's a bright sunny morning and you're ready to start the day. Maybe it's your day off, it's a Sunday, and you're looking forward to something. And you hop out of bed and immediately stub your toe, and that pisses you off, and you rant and rave, for the next minute or so about how someone shouldn't have left that thing there on the floor, or whatever the case might be. And then you shower, and that kind of like refreshes you, and you forget about the fact that you stubbed your toe. You get out of the shower and you're already thinking about something that happened last week in your mind, and then you check your phone and you see an email from a friend that you haven't talked to in years and years, and that makes you happy and a bit nostalgic. And and so I'm not going to elaborate on this too much longer, but you see how it's like this whirlwind of different things constantly interfering with that concept of unity. So it's very important to keep this in mind, that the concept is that there are multiple I's. We all have multiple personality disorders, kind of born that way. Yeah, actually, I'm going to correct that. We are not born that way. We come to become that way in time. So the idea that I'm trying to emphasize here is one of self-awareness. And this really comes down to, if we want to take a look at this from a very scientific standpoint, it comes down to being able to identify our actions and our thoughts and our feelings and behaviors according to different functions. And this comes down to one of the fundamental teachings or concepts, I should say, in the Eminent Way, which has to do with the 5 centers. And we all think we know when we're thinking, and we know when we're feeling, and we know what's instinctive and all this type of stuff. But when you begin the process of actually observing yourself and watching your behavior, like a scientist might watch his or her behavior, you'll find that sometimes it's a bit ambiguous, right? in there. I'm just kind of, have you guys, has everyone here kind of gotten the lesson or whatever on the five centers? I can elaborate on it a bit more. I need to. Ali says no. Okay. Actually, I think the next slide might help a bit. So I'm going to, okay. So within us, let me try to pull up a laser pointer. Hold on one second, please. So within us, you can view in a general sense that we have 5 different minds or five centers or locus of activity within ourselves. The moving center is primarily responsible for everything like the physical movements, that we have, being able to drive a car, even showering. I mean, like literally everything that involves some sort of physical movement that you don't have to think about happens in the moving center. It also so happens that the moving center is the master of habits. So if whatever habits that you have that are just kind of automatic, then those are also taken up by the moving center. The thinking center deals in compare and contrast and analysis, and also to a degree with identification of things. I say to a degree with the identification of things because in actuality, for the most part, the moving center has become accustomed to identifying things. If you walk by a tree, you recognize that it's a tree, but you're not actually thinking that is a tree, that is a bush, that is a butterfly, that is, you're not actively using the thinking center to identify those things. That would be the moving center. The instinctive center and the moving center actually work together very, very, very closely from the standpoint of the instinctive center is what commands and directs the moving center. The way to think about it is this, is that everything that you were born with, so like, for instance, a natural fear of falling, okay? Babies have this. They don't have to be told that they are afraid of falling. The experiment goes like this. They put a baby on a glass plate, right? That half of it has, it's like, there's a drop off, right? So there's like a shelf here, glass plate that goes across both the shelf and whatever, so that as the baby crawls, it can see down in there. It won't go beyond that point in there. That's an example of the instinctive center. One of its functions is to actually protect us, protect our body, protect our other systems. It also controls things like respiration and your heartbeat and your digestion, everything that involves some sort of movement that you have really no cognizant awareness of, or very little. Right. The emotional center, as you can probably guess, deals with emotions. But the emotional center it's a point that we actually study a lot when we talk about eminent way psychology, from the standpoint of its use according to design or its misuse in our culture. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a bit, but really what the emotional center is designed to do is to connect to things. It can either connect to something external or it can connect to something internal. And like I said, we'll talk about this a bit more, but I'm going to bring it up now, that anytime you sense or feel or have a negative emotion, its origin is always outside of yourself. Okay, there's no negative emotion that has its origin inside of yourself. Now, someone might say, "Oh, what about agony when I experience pain of stubbing my toe?" It's actually an instinctive response. And I'll talk about subcenters in a minute too. There's a lot piling up, isn't it? But yeah, anyway, so, and then when we have positive emotions, that is always comes from the inside. When you look at a sunset, you might think that it's the sunset that's causing it, but it's not. It's not. If you're really aware, it's your own internal content about however you feel already endemic to you about that sunset. Okay. All right. I want to tell the fork story. This is something. So the centers, they all have individual subcenters within them as well. And for simplicity's sake, even though each of them is divided into 5, in other words, there's a moving part of the thinking center. There is an emotional part of the thinking center, instinctive, sexual, and so on and so forth. that's important as you begin to observe yourself and try and identify what your different behaviors, which center your different behaviors are associated with, to understand that. And the example that I give is this happened to me just the other day. I was practicing self-observation, and I was kind of watching myself unload the dishwasher. And I came across an interesting thing. Well, first of all, very easy to identify the fact that, when my hand reaches down to get the forks and, all the silverware out of the dishwasher, that's all moving function. I don't have to think about that. You almost can't even observe the speed at which the moving center is able to do these kinds of tasks. It's almost impossible to observe it in fullness. But then when I got to the silverware drawer and I started putting things away, I noticed something interesting in myself, that I have this inherent need for order. In other words, it bugs a part of me if the little forks are mixed with the big forks and the little spoons are mixed with the big spoons, right? And God forbid that there's a fork in the spoon thing, right? It rubs me the wrong way. That's the only way to put it. And so I started thinking to myself, what part of me has that need for that kind of order? Oh, and furthermore, they all have to be neatly stacked too. So it can't be like, skewed from one another or whatever. They have to be sitting correctly. It's a part of my psychology that I was trying to figure out. And what I came to in this is that it was the instinctive part of the thinking center. The thinking center is the brain, and the brain loves order. The brain loves cool, continuous thought processes. I'll give you an illustration of this. If you've ever been trying to read something and you get partway through and then somebody interrupts you, and you answer their question or whatever, and then you start that paragraph over and you begin again, and they interrupt you again and you have to start over and again, right? That causes heat in the brain. The brain is designed, and the thinking center is designed to have continuous, cool, forward flowing movement in there. That's one of its fundamental natures. Now, we all know this idea that, like, if you are in a messy environment, how you just kind of feel unclear in your own head. That's the instinctive part of the thinking center that's coming into play. Just like my fork and spoon type of thing is that we want to project external order into our world, so that we have less clutter, less things that we have to process, so that we can kind of continue this thought process. That's an example of where that was coming from in myself, at least as I added it up. Yeah, so is that clear that we have, as you begin to kind of analyze your own self, that we have these sub aspects of each center? It gets really, really intriguing, really does. Any questions so far on this?
Yesterday, my son was helping me rearrange furniture in my bedroom. Well, in order to get everything in order, you have to make a mess.
Yeah, right? Disorder first, right?
And I realized how much the mess was really overpowering me. So I just felt off. My heart was racing. I had to sit down. I was like, it just was bugging me. I wanted it done now, and then to wake up this morning and look around my room, I'm like, this feels good.
Yes.
Everything's back and everything's in its right place now, and I'm not like the most organized person in the world, but when there's chaos, you can really feel the difference in your whole body, not just your mind, but it affects you physically as well.
Yeah, it would be interesting, Lou, next time you observe something like that, is to try and get a sensation, not a feeling, not an emotion, but an actual sensation in your body where you feel that disruption occur. Because when you were describing it, it almost sounded like to do with part of the emotional center, actually, instead of necessarily the thinking center. Wow. And this is the point too, is that every person is wired a little bit differently, and I'll go into something really cool that you guys are going to love about that in a bit. But this isn't the study of anyone else. This is just the study of you. So let me give you a couple of hints. If you feel the impact in and around your head, it's probably the thinking center. If you feel the impact either at the throat area or the solar plexus area, it's probably emotions, okay? If it's a generalized feeling and you can't actually locate it somewhere in your body, it could actually be the sexual center, and I'll talk about that after this. The instinctive center almost always is in the spine.
And
And
it was all across my chest.
yeah, so probably an emotional, probably, I wonder. Well, I'll let you figure it out, okay? But yeah, good observation. I talked about the sexual center. It's not just about sex. The sexual center, that is the tip of the iceberg as far as the function of the sexual center goes. Its primary purpose is, I guess I would use the word propositional. Propositional from the standpoint of being able to almost intuitively take two different things and merge and marry them together to create something higher than the two parts themselves. That's also the essence of having a child, for instance, reproduction. But this can be something artistic where you take a concept from outside yourself and a feeling from inside yourself or a thought from inside yourself, and you produce something. It can even register as the excitement of learning something new. Although in that situation, the excitement of learning something new would be the sexual part of the thinking center, right? Because the thinking center always wants to learn something new. It's always hungry for more knowledge. But that excitement in there means that the sexual part of that is propositional about what can I actually do in the future with this knowledge. There could be an emotional component in there too, but yeah. Okay, good. All right, any other questions?
Does that also include when you're eating really good food?
Well, it depends on each person. For me, when I eat really good food, it's probably more my instinctive center.
Okay.
By and large.
When you eat something, you're just like, oh my God.
Right. That is most likely the emotional part of the moving center.
Okay.
Likely, right? Because the moving center loves food, and if you don't, it loves eating, I should say. If you don't believe me, just try skipping a meal intentionally and seeing how cranky your moving center gets, how irritable you get. I mean, the moving center is really able to kind of throw everything else into a bit of a tizzy. But yeah, that would probably be the emotional part of the moving center.
So on the sexual side, then, would that also include, and this is a serious question, I was joking on the other one, but that also include the maternal instinct in all of us, as far as like, even if it's not even your own child, you just instinctively grab a child away from, the fire or whatever.
Yeah. So if it's not your own child, that would be almost entirely an instinctive action towards your mandate as a human being. Mandate meaning coming from the planet as a human being on the planet to protect other human beings, or especially the future of humanity, being the young ones. That comes specifically from the planet and is very endemic and natural. We don't even have to think about that. If it is your own child, other aspects begin to come into play. It could actually be the instinctive part of the emotional center, or even the instinctive part of the sexual center. So yeah, so this is the point. I can't make hard, fast rules about this because each person is wired slightly differently. Each person's centers are operating a little bit differently, and so on and so forth.
There are gray areas too.
Well, that is true. There are gray areas only insofar as we're unable to determine it for ourselves. you actually are capable of knowing exactly what part within you does everything that you do in time. But it's going to be different for you than it is for me, and different for both of us than it is, for Ali or Alex or, all that. So very personal approach to psychology from this standpoint. So self-awareness exercise number 1 is to make it your aim or your goal or your God, whatever you want to call it, to observe yourself throughout the day and assign each of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations to a particular center. Self-awareness exercise number 2. This one's so cool because this does actually get into the point where you become fairly good at, once you master this, you become fairly good at also reading other people. But there are 5 areas that I would suggest that you focus on when you're trying to become more self-aware. And these are the 5 modes of external expression that we have. Our movements. In other words, if you walk across the room from one place to another, watch how your body moves. We all kind of tend to move at a certain pace. I can actually tell you mine is dun, 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 dun. That's my actual innate rhythm. You can hear it. I can hear it in my mind as I do it, right? Gestures. We all have a certain number of fixed gestures, right? I'm doing some now. Also notice within gestures, notice the difference between gestures that you have and illustrators. Illustrators are, if I say, I want you to go over there and get something, or the future. People do this for the future, for example. Okay, that would be an illustration of something that you're saying. Whereas sometimes we just have particular gestures that don't actually have much relevance to what it is that we're saying. Okay, so those are things. Postures. Postures would be the next one. Postures are the physical body positions or states that are between the transitional movements. Okay. What you'll notice more than likely is that you probably don't have any more than a dozen or maybe even 7 or 8 habitual postures. We think we're so versatile, but we tend to always sit the same way, or one of 2 different positions. We tend to always stand in 1 or 2 positions. If you have more than a dozen, you probably grew up in very early on in theater or something, because they tend to become fixed by about 11 or 12 years old, our various postures. But again, just like a scientist, observe your movements, observe your gestures, observe your postures. Tone of voice. Tone of voice is a very important one, right? It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Who's heard that, right? Everybody's heard, it's not what you said, it's how you said it, yeah? We tend to take on various tones of voice, mostly dependent upon what we're feeling emotionally. So this can be kind of a bridge into the emotional center and also observing our emotions. Right, and then facial expressions. Yeah, what kind of facial expressions do you? So facial expressions are the posture of the face. Does that make sense? We move from expression to expression, and if you're curious of looking it up, there's a really fascinating science known as microexpressions. Microexpressions. A doctor, I can't think of his name at the moment, but a doctor 20, 30 years ago started recording people, video recording people as they were in interviews, and then slowing it down and watching. And he started to note that there were 7 basic expressions that people would go to, but only for like 1/15 of a second. In other words, if something emotionally impacted a person in a certain way, for a split second, their face would actually adopt an expression that was very true to how they felt about that. But then, if they were offended, for instance, and it wasn't appropriate for them to be offended in that context, they'd flash the expression and then mask it instantly with their kind of cultural training of like, I'm not supposed to be offended in this position. But he got to the point where he could actually begin to see those micro expressions in daily interactions with people. And then he also started teaching other people how to recognize those expressions. So there's actually, it's a kind of a curious thing, but you will notice that your face has a posture or a set of postures that you tend to adopt. Yeah. So facial expressions, so movements, gestures, postures, tone of voice, and facial expressions. And I'm seeing a pop-up here, which indicates I might have some messages, but I don't have my messages thing open. So if someone wants to just jump in, please do. If not, I'll continue on.
The doctor is Paul Ekman.
Paul Ekman, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's worked with a lot of people when they do those dramas on television where the investigators are so good at reading the micro expressions. He's consulted on all of those things.
Yeah, I know he worked with like FBI and CIA and other law enforcement and intelligence agencies and all that type of stuff too. So yeah, it's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think his primary focus though was on deception detection, was it not?
Yeah, deception detection. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Because there's it's your tell. A lot of poker players use it for their game,
Right.
being deceptive or not.
It's worth looking into, but not from the standpoint of learning to read other people, but learning to read yourself, because
So, what's the difference between that and how does that work with your body language? Because sometimes you could be sitting there, with the arms crossed, right?
Mhm.
Totally leaning back like you're not interested. Whereas if I was interested, I would lean forward, I'm not sitting in a chair, so I'm leaning back, but you get the point. But my facial expression is, open eyes, nodding, showing interest. Do you see where that goes back to what you were saying earlier, that we are all different. We're all going to have different tells and gestures and not necessarily the RBF is a good sign to judge somebody by, right?
Yeah, I mean, none of these things should be taken in isolation, especially if you are kind of reading your own body language, because a lot of times when I do this, it doesn't mean that I'm closed off. It means that something is brewing in me, right? I'm maintaining that energy because something is kind of cooking inside me. I can very actively be listening to someone and still be in what would appear to be a closed off posture. One application of body language that's important to consider, and I say body language, but I really want you to apply it to yourself. Become scientists observing your own body language. But it has to do with the concept of baselines. You cannot, in the example of body language as it's used in a cultural context, you can't just walk up to somebody and go, oh, they are XYZ and begin to put labels on them based just on their posture. You actually have to interact with someone. The same thing goes with lying. There's this myth that when people lie, they look up and to the right. It's not true. Some people do, some people don't. What you do in order to detect if a person is lying is you ask them a few baseline questions about things that they would normally tell the truth about. And watch their position, watch their posture, watch where they look, and so on and so forth. You develop a baseline. And then you ask them the pointed question. And if they diverge from that, from what you've observed after 4 or 5 questions to something else differently, they might be lying to you. And I say might be. So yeah, from an external standpoint, the same thing applies internally, because what you'll notice is that you adopt certain tones of voice. And I'm saying you in all of you, all of us, general sense. We adopt certain movements, gestures, postures, tones of voice, and facial expressions when we're lying. And I don't just mean lying to other people, even when we're lying to ourselves.
Generally, when someone's looking up, they're processing. They're looking back in their file folder what the information is that they're looking for. That's one of the things we were taught.
It may be. I'll teach you guys a little magic trick, okay? You'll look like mind readers after you do this. Go up to someone who's not in this class, okay? Go up to somebody and say, hey, I want to do an experiment with you. It's a thought reading experiment, okay? Do me a favor and picture the front door on your childhood home. You give them the opportunity to do that, right? And you watch where they look as they access that information, okay? And then you say, okay, erase that, blank slate. Now, I want you to just think about your favorite piece of music and allow them the opportunity to do that. And as they begin to access that information, again, monitor where their eyes go and how their posture is and all that type of stuff. And then the third question is, I want you to think about how you felt when you had your first kiss. And watch where they go then, okay? With those three things. And then say, okay, now erase all that. Now just think of one of those three things and really try and amplify it in your mind and visualize it as strongly as you can. 100% of the time, you will be able to nail it. And they'll be like, wow, how did you guess, right? This is the thing. This is baselining. Now, that will not work. I can't then take that information from you, Lou, and go to Jeff and say, think of one of these three things and immediately nail it, because Jeff is going to be so different, right?
I just did that with you, and I just watched my eyes go to different places, my eyeballs. I didn't move my head, and it just went to 3 different places.
Yeah, so now, you know, you have a budding career as a mentalist, a magician or something, right? But yeah, the important aspect of this, though, is to watch yourself. Watch yourself as though you were watching someone else, and you'll learn so much. You really will. Yeah, and I kind of pointed out before too, you might be a bit surprised and a bit taken aback by the lack of diversity you may have. You might think you have hundreds of postures that you may or may not assume throughout the day. Probably not. For most of us, probably not. Or tones of voice, or gestures, or whatever. Okay, now comes the hard part, the self-facing part. I've recommended that you try to, as often as possible, observe yourself and remember to do so. And it will actually be quite easy. As soon as we finish this call, you'll probably be very inspired, very lit up about trying to continue to observe yourself. But what's most likely going to happen is that over the next day, things will begin to fade, and then you may forget for a couple of days and then be like, oh yeah, Pierce offered this exercise, you know, I'm gonna try again really hard. And then you might be successful for another day or two, or an hour here and there type of thing. And then maybe 2 weeks will go by, or a month, or, you know, God forbid, a couple of years go by, and you suddenly go, oh yeah, I meant to do that, right? And what this points out is that despite our best intentions, or whatever aims that we set for ourselves, we can't consistently remember to be aware of ourselves. Usually what happens is something draws our attention away. I will tell you, I'm drawing. That yellow spot just appeared. Do you guys see that? Do you guys see that on the screen? I don't know.
No,
I see it.
Oh, you're drawing. Okay. I didn't realize you guys had the ability to do that. That's awesome. Good. I'll let you guys make diagrams. But yeah, our emotions oftentimes will connect to something, or our mind will try and connect to something. Grocery store is the worst place. If you want a real challenge in remembering yourself, go to a store, go to a big box store. The reason why is because they have specifically engineered everything in there to try to hook your attention. Everything is engineered to try to steal energy from you and hook your attention. It's incredibly difficult. It's much easier, for example, to go on a walk and remember yourself than it is to go to Walmart and remember yourself. Yeah. Yeah, so our emotions or other parts of us connect to something. If you could be aware of yourself all the time, you would be able to observe all of the time. And because you can't remember yourself and you can't concentrate, that means that you don't have will. Now, this is what I said. This is going to be a little bit hard-facing. I'm not accusing you of not having will. What I'm saying is that you may discover this for yourself, as I did discover for myself, that it is extremely impossible. No, extremely difficult. It is not impossible, but it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of practice. And You know, I've been teaching these kinds of things for many, many years now, and no one, it's very rare the person that says, you know what, Pierce, you're right, I have no will. And you know, you may look at yourself and be like, well, I'm the exception. And I don't know. It's not my place to say whether you're the exception or not, but I would encourage you to at least try the experiment and see what you come up with.
Are you connecting this with being present in the moment and not just observing
Yeah,
ourselves?
so there's two aspects to it. One is just the, let me go back, is just the idea, being able to maintain the state of consciousness that says, I am here. And it's a very unique feeling when you actually feel like you are here. You recognize, you know, I am Pierce. I am sitting here in front of, you know, these people. I am teaching right now. I am here. Like, it's such a startling recognition. It has such a unique flavor to it. One thing you might notice or appreciate is that most of your childhood memories, the strong ones, actually come from moments like that, where you suddenly had this awareness of, like, you know, as a little child, everything's new, right? Oh my God, I'm here. We tend to remember what's novel. As we wear on into our 30s and 40s and 50s and so on and so forth, fewer and fewer things become novel. We have to make our life novel. We have to make those impressions lasting. So yeah, it is awareness. There's two aspects though. You can't observe yourself. You can't observe your centers, or, you know, those 5 aspects of manifestation, until you become aware of yourself. Until you have that feeling of I am here, your observations are likely to be inaccurate at best, and they won't last. And so you won't actually develop from them. You may have a realization in one center. The thinking center, for instance, says, oh, that's interesting, and makes a mental note of it, but you won't remember it tomorrow. In order to actually be present, you actually have to have the feeling of I am here in at least 3 of your centers. At least 3 of your centers, preferably the thinking, the emotional, and what do you guys think? Moving. Yeah, the moving center. The moving center is the one that puts everything else to sleep anyway. So if you can wake it up, you're already 1/3 there. Jeff, did you have a question?
Yeah, not a question, a comment. I've done this exercise a couple of times, and a little trick that was just really revealing is to, like, tie something around your finger, or a bracelet or something like that.
Absolutely.
So I found during the day, you know, it triggers me. I go, oh wow, I forgot to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, people wearing Apple Watches, you have a really convenient tool there, because it's always trying to alert you about something like your health or whatever. You can use that, but yeah, absolutely. But you know, the thing is too, is that here's another aspect that I observed in myself. Even when I would tie something around my wrist, or you know, put a can of beans in the middle of the living room floor or something like that, just to remember, a part of me actually started to get annoyed and bored with it. Like, and then self-deceit kicked in, because I would notice the string tied around my wrist and be like, oh yeah, I have to remember myself, right? But it lacked the vivification of actual self-remembering. It was self-deception.
Well, it went into the moving center, right?
It did absolutely go into the moving center. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The moving center is so tricky. It's your best ally and your biggest enemy all at the same time. Yeah, very much so. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about the 4 states of consciousness. And okay, so let me back up. If you continue to practice this I am here and the self-observation, you will begin to realize that there are 4 states of consciousness. In the beginning, you'll realize that there's at least 3. One is what we call sleep. In other words, literal sleep at night. You go to bed. That is a state of consciousness where you are basically unconscious, except for certain aspects. Then there is what society calls consciousness, but which isn't really consciousness. You know, this waking state, right? I'm using air quotes a lot. This is one of my gestures, by the way. This waking state that we tend to think that we're in all the time is conscious, is not conscious. It's automatic. The third state of consciousness is that actual self-consciousness, when you have that feeling of I am here in at least 3 of your centers, that feels awake. And I give the example, one of the very first times, and it's so vivid, this is how I know it's true. One of the very first times that this happened to me, I was a kid and I was walking down the street, and I had this very strong I am here moment of awakening. And I passed by some people as I was walking down the sidewalk. Thank you. As I was walking down the sidewalk, and they looked like zombies. Like something in me just felt like they were sleepwalking. And in that state, when you begin to look at other people that are not in that state, it feels like you're watching a movie of sleeping people kind of doing things. And the sad part about that is that it didn't last. It's not like I had my awakening at 12 years old and then I had been awakened ever since. It was a glimpse. It was just a passing glimpse. And then I would say no more than 5 minutes maybe later, I was one of those sleeping people again. So that's self-consciousness. There is a fourth state of consciousness above and beyond that, which is called objective consciousness. And that is, it ties into the mentality in higher centers, which I'll get into, but it's where you actually see reality for what it is. And moments, how do I describe this? If you have moments of objective consciousness, everything around you kind of tends to disappear or take on a, like you can see through everything, like everything you understand or sense or feel that everything around you is also just a vibration, and that everything around you is very connected, and that you are not only a speck in this universe, but also the universe itself. It's an extreme, it's indescribable, actually. It's not something that I can say, if you feel this, and this, you have reached a state of objective consciousness. And 2, just like self-consciousness, it takes a lot of practice to have that feeling of objective consciousness, and you might catch glimpses of it and then it fleets and you might forget to remember yourself and so on and so forth. Okay, so those are the 4 states of consciousness. Now, I talked about the higher faculties. In addition to the 5, there are 2 higher faculties that are fully developed within us, fully present, and need no work. The problem is we just can't hear them. Until we're in a state of at least self-remembering, let alone objective consciousness, at least self-remembering, we have no communication with the higher thinking center and higher emotional center. When you come into the point of self-remembering, you do establish a connection with the higher emotional center. And you begin to have more of a feeling life, not from the standpoint of ooey gooey sticky emotions about, oh, what a beautiful sunset, that not that kind of emotional life, but the ability to actually connect to things or people. I'll give you an example of what the higher emotional center is capable of. We take something like this cup, right? And if you want to understand the nature of this cup, the scientific approach would be to hack it apart and look at what's inside of the cup to see what it's made of. But when you do that, what you haven't done is, all you've done is created new surfaces to look at. You're still not actually seeing what the cup is made of from a cosmic or from an inner standpoint. And no matter how many times you tear this apart, all you do is create new surfaces, okay? But with the emotional center, now I'll switch the analogy to a tree because it's more useful. With the emotional center, same thing applies to a tree. You can either look at the tree, cut it in half, make new surfaces, cut it in half again, make new surfaces, or you can just sit across from it and reach out with your emotional center and establish a connection to what that tree actually is. And when that happens, when you're able to connect to it emotionally, it begins to transfer itself into you, and you begin to transfer yourself into it. And this is what the energy of emotion was actually designed to do in the human complex. Questions on that? You can do it with people too. Just be careful, because sometimes people will feel very naked, very invaded when you do that. If you're in a moment of being self-conscious and you look deeply into someone's eyes and then try to connect to them, they will feel very exposed sometimes. So it's best to take more of a permissive approach to it, as opposed to being invading, right? Because development, I mean, as far as other people's development goes, it's none of my business and none of your business what other people choose to do or not to do, right? The only thing that really matters is what I myself choose to do in a development standpoint. Okay, now this is important, because when we start to talk about things like the higher emotional center and higher thinking center, it becomes a bit surreal from the standpoint of, if you don't have any experience with it, then you might think that you are expected to have faith. And I'll tell you right now that this system requires absolutely no faith whatsoever. These are assertions that I'm making, and if you want to know the truth of it, try. Okay, verify it for yourself. Absolutely no faith required. Yeah, is that clear? Can't state it more simply than that, right?
Faith as in religion, or are you talking trust in yourself?
No, I don't mean trust in yourself. That's a different thing. I mean trust in me, or in what I'm saying.
Okay.
Or if you don't have any experience with the state of self-consciousness or the state of objective consciousness, don't take away like, wow, these things exist, this is real, I just learned something new. You didn't learn something new. I'm not directing this at you, by the way, Lou. I'm just saying in general, a person didn't actually learn something new, they just heard something new. Learning something new is actually verifying it for themselves. So no faith in anything that you hear or come across in the system. Just take it away and prove it or disprove it for yourself. That's all there is to it. Okay, let's talk about imagination and daydreaming. These things have positive connotations in our culture. The cultural connotation is like, oh, what an active imagination, like it's a blessing to be able to daydream. And let me draw a distinction between what I mean by daydreaming and what I mean by imagination. Imagination, in the context of the Eminent Way, is a directed visualization that involves the state of self-consciousness. Okay, so 3 centers have to be aware, first and foremost. And it can be extremely useful from the standpoint of visualizing where you wish to go and setting your aim in your life, and enabling certain qualities and features in yourself that you may not yet have. That's, if you are conscious while you are doing it, it is imagination and can be a very useful tool. If it happens on its own, it's daydreaming, and that's a waste of energy. Because ultimately, development comes down to how much energy you have to enhance your being. Yeah. Examples of it happening on its own. Gosh, this is great, right? Who here has been in a situation, because I know I have, where somebody pisses you off, right? And you don't actually talk to them about it, but for the next hour and a half in your mind, you're replaying this little conversation that you coulda, woulda, shoulda had with them, right? And you're saying, well, blah, 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 and they're responding, and you've got this whole like imagination, this whole thing going on back and forth. That is an extreme waste of energy. That's daydreaming. That's a form of daydreaming. It happens on its own, and the other aspect is that it has no potential for manifesting in reality. That's one of the key factors of this. It wastes energy if it cannot be manifested in reality. Here's another example. The difference between daydreaming about the lottery, like everyone's like, oh, if I had won the lottery, I would do this and I would do that and I would do this and I would do that, right? And yet sometimes they're not even buying lottery tickets. So how in the hell are they ever going to win the lottery, right? It has no foundation in reality. It's just this imaginary what if type of thing. Now, if you get a winning lottery ticket, And then you begin to imagine what you're going to do with that money. That is not a waste of energy if you're also self-conscious while you do it. Okay, so do you understand the distinctions between daydreaming and imagination? They're very closely tied in, and they can be very, very easily mistaken for one another. Yeah, any questions there? We're encouraged, aren't we, to daydream in our society? Okay, now we come to another hard topic, lying. I call lying is the thinking or speaking of things that one does not know. Mostly to oneself. It can be to other people. Here's the thing. In actuality, what matters most is not what you do, but why you do something. Okay, so, but if you were an alien coming down to the planet to study humans, one of the things that you would notice first and foremost is the chief feature in human beings is that we lie constantly to ourselves and to others. We would be maybe considered, if they were categorizing all the species on the planet, we would be the lying monkey, right? Other animals don't do that. Other animals don't put on pretenses. The closest an animal ever comes to lying is when like for instance, a cat puffs up to look larger when they're afraid. You know, that's an instinctive response. That's about as close as an animal comes to actually lying. And as you continue to practice this I am here and the self-observation, you're going to begin to notice this in yourself. And it's not like bold-faced lies, you know, like you're just constantly walking around making stuff up. It's not like that. It's literally comes down to the assumptions that you have made about yourself and about life that have no necessary backup, no necessary foundation in reality. They are otherwise known as opinions. Most of our opinions come from something that we heard from somebody else that for whatever reason we liked, and then convinced ourselves that it's also a truism for ourselves, and so on and so forth. And so there comes a point in time when you have observed yourself enough that you start to begin to deconstruct all of these illusions that you have about yourself and about your reality that were based on things other people told you. This is one of the reasons why in the Eminent Way, I spend very little time, you know, because color, number, and symbol, as we talked about in the tarot class on Thursday, are very, they're very fundamental to nature. And I could just put up a chart and say, you know, each color, and I have done this before, probably shouldn't have, but each color means this, each number means this, each symbol means this. I could put up charts that say that, but here's the risk in that, is that someone will memorize those, and 25 years from now, they notice something about 4, you know, something natural in 4, and they refer back to that in their mind as if it's their own knowledge, when maybe they haven't actually gone on a soul search in their own life to collect examples of 4 or red or cups and rods or whatever the case might be. If you're just relying on what someone told you to form the foundation of your truth and your reality without going out and actually discovering it for yourself, then that's a form of lying. It's subtle, yes, but yeah. Well, why is this important on a personal development journey? Well, let me tell you one thing too. When you begin to actually observe yourself, you're going to come across some things that you think, oh God, like I do that. Yeah. You're going to become somewhat judgmental about yourself, and you're almost immediately going to want to correct things. I would strongly urge you not to. For the first quite a long time, I'm not going to set a time limit on it, but for a long time, just accept them. Just look at the behaviors in yourself and just go, that's interesting. Like a scientist would studying some alien creature that it doesn't know. A scientist isn't going to go, oh wow, it picks its nose. We have to put an end to that, right? It will just, in the chart, it picks its nose. Okay? It's a funny example. But you begin to notice all kinds of things about yourself that you're like, I didn't realize I was like that. And the urge, the compulsion is, wow, I've really got to change that. Please don't. Please don't, because you don't know yet where it came from in yourself. And you're a very complicated machine. And if you change one little part of that machine, something else over here could break that might have even a bigger impact on you. The point of this, for a long time, is just to understand how the machine itself actually operates. Okay, and do try and let go of the judgment, because the truth is that we're all the same. We don't have, we don't necessarily have the same chief weirdnesses or chief features exactly the same, but we all have them. We all have things that we're like, that's odd. Yeah. So yeah, please avoid the temptation to try and alter everything. You might turn into a monster. I mean that jokingly. Okay. Questions online? Okay. Let's talk a bit about observing emotions. First of all, it's not actually possible in the beginning to observe your emotions in real time. You can only do it after the fact. Emotions, the speed of the 5 centers, the thinking center is the slowest. Okay, we actually like plod through thoughts. That's why it likes that, step A, step B, step C, that type of thing, because we can watch our mind work. The moving center is almost impossible to watch. If someone throws you a ball and your hand goes up and grabs it, okay, like that kind of speed, your thinking center, your thinking mind cannot actually comprehend every movement that went into catching that ball. It can do it in retrospect, and it can analyze and figure that out. The emotions, well, instinct is faster. The emotions are the second fastest aspect of the 5-fold energy system in the human complex. And so to watch emotions as they're happening isn't possible unless you're using a higher center to do so. What you can do is look at them retrospectively or after the fact and try to understand them, see where they came from, and those types of things. Now, I'm going to say something, and again, this goes back to the faith thing. Either prove or disprove it for yourself. But I've come to the conclusion in my own life that negative emotions are actually unnatural and are very destructive. They don't serve a useful purpose. They leak energy. They destroy our physical health. They are a malfunction in that system in the human that's actually meant to connect to things. And like I said, look for yourself and see over time. One exercise, yeah.
I'd like to just counter that in my experience is
Yes.
that, by way of law of 2, I've found that observing the negative emotions creates a contrast.
What you're doing is you are elevating it. You're no longer, okay. When you stick a piece of food in your mouth, you begin to chew it, and also enzymes from your saliva begin to break that down. Okay, in other words, you're applying a higher hydrogen or applying a higher energy to that lower substance in order to elevate it. What you just said is by applying the law of 2, you're creating a friction in yourself, which is liberating the energy of that emotion into something higher and finer. But just being blah and never observing it is just a leak of energy. Stretch with me.
Yeah, with that, it's just because then, and sometimes it's very challenging, but I can evolve it into the next thing. Or in psychology, it becomes an integration, right? An assimilation and integration of, frankly, one of the eyes.
Yeah, it goes to nourish one of the eyes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let me draw a distinction between a self-development journey and someone not on a self-development journey, because the idea of expressing negative emotion or not expressing negative emotions really flies directly in the face of modern psychology, where psychology says, oh no, that is extremely unhealthy to repress your emotions. You're going to end up with ulcers or cancer or whatever the case might be, right? Mental disorders, all number of things by not expressing your negative emotions. And they are 100% correct, but we're talking about different things, okay? If you are just bottling your emotions and not doing anything with them, they do turn into a poison in your system. The whole idea of this inner alchemy of, I mean, energy is energy, right? It's whether it be emotional energy, thinking energy, sexual energy, the energy of movement, it's all energy. And this inner alchemy, like Jeff, you were describing, of looking at these emotions, can transform them into something finer within yourself. But if you're just stuffing them, that is unhealthy. Okay, I would I would say try the experiment of, for 1 week, trying to not express negative emotions. Now, I did not say don't have negative emotions. There's a huge difference between that. Someone makes you angry, you then have a choice. You can choose not to express it, and if I could just, I wish I could just convey what that feels like. Someone really, really makes you angry and you choose not to express that emotion. You get such a surge of energy and your thinking becomes more clear, like everything just enlivens in yourself. You're not doing this out of fear. And first of all, again, let me emphasize, I'm not saying you don't get angry. Absolutely, get angry. It's fine. Just don't express it and see what happens. Do it as an experiment. Just see how you feel after doing it for like a week. Give it a shot. If you choose. Up to you.
I always try and do is when, because it goes back to tone, inflection, right?
Yeah.
Before I
express it.
Before I respond, I always ask a clarifying question to make sure that, did I understand you just said,
Yeah.
and then I, in that moment, I can definitely use my consciousness to decide whether I'm going to yell or go, oh, okay, I thought you meant this, so, And then the other thing I was thinking about when we were talking is about observing the negative. I reflect back to, I had panic attacks, and so it took me years. My son, as a child, was more aware of it than I was. He would go, Mom, do we need to get you something to eat? And I'd be like, oh my God, yes, let's, he was more aware of it than I was. And so now I'm much more aware of it. And you're right about the negative energy that produces and how much time is wasted on it. But now that I am aware of, one, the triggers, or two, if I don't see a trigger coming, but I can start feeling that negative energy coming to the surface, the awareness, it allows me to go, okay, I need to go do X or Y, to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like to do when I'm mad is go clean the house, and I clean it like
yes.
And
I'm a great cleaner.
Let me point this out, that's still expressing the negative emotion. I'm actually talking about keeping it, holding it, and letting it grow into something else. If you just push it through the moving center, you have depleted it in yourself. You've minimized its potential poison impact in yourself. But there's a difference in this inner alchemy of saying, I'm going to choose to just actually sit with this and hold it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of intricacies in this, but yeah, that's my go-to, right?
Embracing the demons.
It's absolutely exhilarating if you do it right. This is why I'm saying just give it a shot for a week or even 3 days, or depending on your frequency of how often you get mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Just try it.
found in not doing it, in different forms, the same issue will come up again and again until you do it.
Mm. True. Yeah. Life does try to evolve us, actually. Like, we live on a planet that was designed to allow the maximum opportunity for human evolution. And I think what a lot of times people don't realize is that that involves friction, right? So anytime there's a person in your life or a thing in your life that offers the potential for irritation, maybe try viewing that as a blessing, because it's actually an opportunity to practice this. I mean, I can't impart enough how invigorating it is if you do this correctly. You'll have so much more energy available to you. Yeah, great. Okay, looks like we have several chats. Did people want to jump in? Thumbs up emojis. Okay, great. I'm just checking. Hi, AK. You are in, by the way. Okay. All right. Let's move on. We've talked about the emotional energy being the energy of connection, and how it's supposed to be used by design. We've talked about stopping expressing negative emotions. Here, okay. Instead, here's what you can do instead. Instead of cleaning the house, instead of venting it out some other way, use it as a trigger to remember that feeling of I am, right? That's actually the digestive juices applied to that emotional energy that will enhance consciousness. If you're familiar with the terms of hydrogen, negative emotions are at the level of hydrogen 96, and being able to apply that I am energy, which is hydrogen 24, elevates it up to hydrogen 48. Okay, and that starts its kind of do-re-mi process within the human complex. I said before, you can't really catch negative emotions in the act unless you're viewing them from the standpoint of that self-observation. Self-observation is the beginning of the higher emotional center, which does work faster and can actually watch an emotion in the act. And so as they're happening, if you get yourself into that state of being in a higher emotional center, you can ask yourself questions like, where do they come from? What are they connected to? And, is this obligatory? I have an expression, well, it's not my expression. There is an expression that I have adopted as mine in my life, and it is that people don't do things do things through people. What that means is that we're constantly connecting to something. We're constantly processing energy. We're processing the force from people around us that may have, certain issues, struggles, whatever, that causes us to be in a negative state, or we are near someone who's causing us to be in a more positive state, so on and so forth. But when we are in the realms of automatic functioning and not in the realms of being consciously aware, the I am feeling, then things are just doing things through us. Different energies are acting out through us.
It seems that the I am is connecting to this moment, or otherwise mindfulness. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Mindfulness and moving fullness and emotionfulness. Because it's very important when you do the I am here exercise, like I said before, that you have to have at least 3 centers trying to participate in it. Otherwise, it just becomes, well, actually it becomes a lie in yourself. It becomes an illusion. If you habitually have that I am, oh, I am here, right? It eventually just becomes a moving center habit. If your brain does it, it becomes an intellectual exercise. And if the emotion does it, it becomes sentiment, but sentiment that doesn't actually communicate to the rest of your complex.
Unless you allow it to give yourself space to step back from whatever situation is feeding in negative emotions, so that you can then look at what is causing it and
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
that
One
emotion.
thing- Yeah. One thing you'll notice from the I am here feeling and exercise is that you begin to feel a bit more objective, like you're a third person observing yourself and the situation, and you sit somewhere up here in more of an objective observer type of view. Yeah. So you said you use the word step back from, I would say rise above, but it's the same concept. Yeah.
Basically, yes.
Yep.
Nicely said, though.
Huh?
I said that's a nicer way of saying it.
I don't know if it's nice or not, but yeah, anyway. Because I like to think of things in triangles, right?
Okay, that works too.
All right, let's talk about types. Types become such a fascinating thing in psychology, the study of the soul or the study of the self. And there are so many different type systems out here, and I almost probably should not have put the Enneagram up for the simple reason that it might link you into something you already think you know about types, because there's a whole system of typology that was kind of proffered in, I think, roughly the 70s and 80s about Enneagram types and all that type of stuff. But it does actually tie into this. What I would like to first start off with is the concept of man number 1, number 2, and number 3, or lady number 1, number 2, or number 3. Okay, this is not gender specific. We all are born with certain propensities. We are either more inclined to be the thinking type, the analytical type, or we're more inclined to be the moving type, the doer, the athlete, the get physical kind of person, or the emotional person, the sentimental. I feel you, all this type of stuff. These are inclinations that every single person is born with, but the strength of this, and don't get me wrong, it's not like man number 1 is the thinking type and he has no moving aspects and no emotional aspects whatsoever. It's not like that. It happens in thirds, and I'll show you in a minute how this breaks down. But it can be like man number 1 can have a level 3 out of 3 for his thinking ability, and maybe he'll be a 1 in the emotion and a 2 in the moving center, and various different combinations of that. Does that make sense? And so with those combinations, there's actually 27 different types. And I have highlighted 3 of these because they're unicorns. They don't exist in nature. Maybe unicorns do exist. I guess I don't know for sure. But you can see, is this making sense here? I've indicated that the thinking center is indicated by the white number, the moving center by the red number, and the emotion by the yellow. And so all the different combinations of how many strengths you can have in each center reveal 27 types. But since 3 of those would be like 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, or 3, 3, 3, that would be what's called a balanced man, or man number 4. That only happens through work and effort. It doesn't happen, no one's born a fully balanced and developed, otherwise they wouldn't need to be here. This is the home for us perfecting ourselves, right? And so the 27 types actually become 24 types. And those relate to the astrological aspects of the male and female aspects of each of the 12 types. 12 times 2 is 24. With me so far? Yeah, okay, good. So this is the connection between the centers and astrology for anyone who's really interested in astrology. And there's certain aspects to each sign that are predominating in either mentality or in the physicality or the emotionality. Is that a word? All right, so the 7 levels of development of man. Now, when I talk about man number 1, number 2, and number 3, there is no distinction from the standpoint of development. In other words, man number 3 is not more evolved, more development than man number 2 or man number 1. They're all the same. They all fall below that bar of just, these are the 3 propensities by majority. And that's what's indicated here by this blue line in here, that they're all man in progress, if you will. Okay. Man number 4 is balanced man, wherein the thinking, the emotional, and the physical aspects have all reached the same level. Okay. And the reason, if you're really considering this at the moment, you may wonder how a person gets to 111, because that would indicate that something was 0 and 0. And of course, no one is born as like a 100. What it actually means is that in some situations, we have to decrease the energy in a particular center in order for them to level down. Okay, so like for example, if a person is born as a 1 in the thinking center, a 2 in the moving center, and a 3 in the emotional center, they need to actually go down to a 1 in the emotional and moving centers in order to gain that balance, and then begin to create 222 and 333. That's the aspect of becoming a balanced man. It's kind of the balanced person, I should say. It's kind of the lowest common. You go back to go forward. Does that make sense? Okay.
And environmental issues would also factor into this too, right? Cultural and
It does. Yeah.
what you're taught by your parents, or whether you're in a good environment in home or school, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're kind of talking about two laws in there. One is the law of fate, and one is the law of accident. You know, you could have someone who is absolutely brilliant and has all the propensities whatsoever to be a concert pianist, for example, or something like that. But they happen to be born in some tribe in some tribal community somewhere where they've never even seen a piano or whatever. And so the law of accident just, we don't live on an easy planet, and they may not actually end up fulfilling that type of purpose because of their environment. The law of fate means that we'll take the example of that same person now. The law of fate, meaning that he or she has that specific propensity and also becomes aware of it in themselves through things like self-observation and that I am here type of exercise. Maybe that even happened somewhat accidentally, but they got that inclination. Then what they would do is everything in their power to go seek out their destiny in one way, shape, form, or another. And the truth is, we're all like that, except that we don't know ourselves well enough to know what it is that we could be. And so, again, the application of self-observation and the I am exercise will begin to show you what you're like and what your strengths are and what things you need to work on. And then the smart person, or the wise person, I should say, would then go put themselves in a situation at whatever cost where they could become that which they were meant to be. That's the law of fate. So yeah.
I like to recommend a documentary if you guys are interested. It's called Born in Brothels, and it really touches on this very much so, where the fate of these children who were born in brothels, what are they going to do with their lives? And a photographer comes in from the West and gives them cameras, and I'll just leave it at that. And it's amazing to watch these young children develop the way you're talking about with this, and realizing their own ones and twos and what they have available, and which ones went on to do other things and which ones ended up staying where they were. So if you get an opportunity to watch Born in Brothels, it's a fascinating story. And when you were talking about this, it drew me right back to that.
Yeah, great. Will you post that in the chat, please?
Absolutely.
Okay, that way everyone has the access to it. Right, so moving on. So man number 4 can be lost. Actually, all the way up to man number 6 can be lost. It's not like once you achieve man number 4 level that you are now fixed in that, you are completely balanced. Additional work is necessary. Otherwise, you tend to drop back down into kind of your native role of 1, 2, or 3. in there. And then you wake up again years later and go, oh man, I had something. And you work and try again. Man number 5 is when you've reached the point in your life where that self-conscious state becomes the majority. And when you are able to actually carry that with you without forgetting to remember yourself, then the aspects of the higher emotion begin to dominate in your life. And you begin to have more kind of connections, attendances, essences, presences, things like that, that you're able to have have traffic with, begin to help influence your life and help grow you, or help you grow, I should say. Again, though, it's not fixed, and it's certainly not the end either. But through continued efforts in doing that, you'll begin to get more and more moments of that objective sense, that objective awareness. And eventually, now here's the thing. It's not like when you reach the stage of man number 6, or objective consciousness, that you just spontaneously combust and you're just, you're a spiritual being trapped in a carnal body. It's not like that. It's actually what's going on in you is that you have 2 new entities that are beginning to grow. You still have your job. If you have a job now, you still live your life. You still maintain, your family relationships, all those types of things. It's just that now you have at level 5, for instance, you have a second entity, is probably the best way to put it, that occupies and coexists with you. At level 5, you have a third entity that occupies and coexists with you. It is you. Don't get me wrong, it is you, but there are higher aspects of you. And at level 6, with the objective consciousness, you also begin to get like information from the universe directly. This is what I'm saying. When you catch glimpses of it, and I actually have a sense that most of you have had glimpses of, you suddenly have this awareness that everything around you is a bit illusory, right? Or you can perceive the world around you as just waves, or something like that. But when that aspect of you reaches that level and it becomes more firmly established, then you're getting information, you're getting knowledge, or knowings is the better term for it, from all different levels of the universe. It's really quite extraordinary. And yet it filters down. You don't have to suddenly become, grow a long beard and go sit on a mountain or anything like that. It comes into your life as you are. It does cause refinement in your life as you are, but it doesn't mean that you change or become too strange to live here for everyone else. Okay? All right, questions so far? Well, we are at the end of it, and I will open it up for additional questions. If there's anything that particularly struck you or that you need, you would like more information on or elaboration on, please ask now. And then areas of further study that this ties into. Actually, I'm going to pause there and let people ask questions if they'd like to, and then I'll talk a bit about what this all is connected to. Okay. So I'm going to go through this list here, and it's just going to pique your interest, and that's all it's meant to do, because we're not going to do another lesson on all this. But A, B, and C influences refers to the 3 types of influences that arrive here at the planet. C influences are, an example of a C influence would be not a religion itself, but the signal or influence that actually causes a religion to appear for the first time on the planet. That would be an example of one, of a C influence. They always work through somebody or through a group of some people. They don't just sit here and process, all by themselves. They have to manifest through something. When they do manifest through something, they become B influences. And that's where you get like schools, like the Pythagorean school or different esoteric schools. were a B influence. And a B influence actually does two things. It processes that signal from creation through the individuals who are a part of it, and then transmits it back out into society, into the culture. And this is where you get things like, you know, Pythagoras, to continue the example, was an esoteric school, and yet they produced things like the Pythagorean theorem and stuff that we still use in our cultural lives today, you know, different mathematical formulas and so on and so forth. That is an example of an A influence, because everyone learned the Pythagorean theorem in school, but from the context of how to understand triangles, not from the context of how to understand the forces at play in the universe, right? Okay, that's A, B, and C influences. I talked a little bit about the law of accident and the law of fate. We've spoken before about essence and personality. Essence is what you are born with, so it includes things like your soul and your spirit, and also the various propensities. Are you guys all frozen? I see a couple of them frozen. No? Okay. The various propensities that we have, either, you know, whether we're a thinking type of person or a moving type of person or emotional type of person, that's our essence. Our personality is everything that got kind of pasted onto that from about 2.5, 3 years old onward. All the things that, all of our likes and dislikes that may or may not actually even be true. You know? The magnetic center is in reference to something. First of all, not everyone has it. The fact that you're here means that you do have it, or probably do have it, but you will encounter some people in your life that literally have no resonance whatsoever with anything spiritual, anything other than the mundane, anything other than getting up at 5:30 in the morning and going to work and, you know, doing the best job they can at work to be a cog in the machinery of society, and then come home, go to bed, and start it all over the next day. You'll meet people like that. And it can be very confusing, you know? Don't you sometimes just want to be like, wake up, right? It can be very confusing, but it's something that is in some people and is not in other people. And they might be completely lit up about something else, but development just does not interest them whatsoever in any capacity. Yeah? So that's what the magnetic center is referring to. We'll talk more about it. The Enneagram I popped up. I could probably spend months talking about the Enneagram. It's something that very, very much lights me up. The blood being the aspect of ourselves that actually imprints the contents of, first of all, our personality, and eventually is the storage medium for the astral body. Character and principles are like the endocrine system of the blood. They inject features into our higher centers. General habitual living is another term for what happens when the moving center dominates a person's life. General habitual living, listen, the moving center just loves to want to take over everything for itself. It thinks that it can talk for you. It thinks that it can think for you. It thinks that it can do pretty much everything for you in its life. It's like that overachiever in your life, right? What it does is it creates a habit out of everybody. I love to use the example. You go to the store clerk says, "Hey, how are you?" And you go, "I'm good, how are you?" All right, that's all moving center. There's no actual genuineness or intent in there. And if you want to try a good experiment sometime to actually wake someone up temporarily, next time they say, "How are you?" actually tell them, right? Actually go through the list. Start with each of your centers and go, well, let's see, how am I? My thinking today is a bit, I'm thinking about this. It's a bit bright today, actually, compared to yesterday. So I'm really pleased about that. My moving center is complaining, or you don't even have to say my moving center, but you can just, be like, I have a weird feeling in my right foot today that's kind of disturbing for me. I feel cold at the moment. That would be the instinctive center, right? I wish I was somewhere warmer. Emotionally, a little bit low, a little bit just kind of even today.
Nothing. I would love to see this guy's reaction.
Oh yeah, right? I mean, it's like, dude, would you just check out? Yeah, and so on and so forth, right? I would encourage you, if you decide to ever do this, probably stay in the higher regions of the sexual center, and instead of the lower ones. Tell them what's propositional for you. Um, so anyway, that'll wake a person up for a bit, just for a little bit. Eventually, though, it'll click back down. General habitual living. Cosmic triangle and roles and masks. Roles and masks are another term for lying, except for sometimes they're intentional and sometimes they're not, right? You put a person, like in the example of the store checker, you put them on the spot like that, and they have no role and no mask to be able to wear for that. They're just very naked all of a sudden, right? They don't know what to think, don't know how to respond to you. And that shows you, when you do that with a person, or even do that with yourself, it shows you what is behind the mask. It shows you a person's essence, right? Because the essence doesn't ever wear a mask. It just is what it is. And most of the time, because most people's essences are relatively underdeveloped, it has no idea how to communicate or respond. Literally, you'll just get someone going, right? If you take them away, take their roles and masks away. Or your own. Right? We've all felt a little out of place at times. It's when we don't have a role to put in our personality at the moment.
Yeah, when how you get into those places like you were saying, the cashier, how are you doing? Oh, how are you? It's just like, it means nothing to anybody, and everybody's just in this robotic state. And so I always do things like, if somebody's, you go into a restaurant and they'll ask, can I have your name? And my response is always, don't you have one?
Right.
And the look on their faces gets them every time, and just to break up the monotony, make people laugh and realize, God, stop taking everything so seriously,
Yeah, humor's a good way to get to wake people up for a little bit. Another one you could try at restaurants is, when they say like, just the two of you or just the three of you, just say, well, one of each.
I always say, you walk in and they'll say how many, and I'll say 22, and then they get this like crisis look on their face, like we're not prepared for 22 people.
Yeah. What's really great about that though, Lou, is that they will remember that. They will remember that for a long time because you actually do a bit of a service to that life in a very caring way. Even if you use humor, if they remember it a few years from now, or like, oh, that one lady, like she was so funny. Yeah. What you've actually done is you have enhanced the quality of their life and given them more energy, more opportunity, because the only thing that ever actually matters in our life is the moments when we were conscious. And if you can, even if it's accidental to them, or maybe incidental to them, if you can wake them up even for 10 seconds, you have just added to the quality of their life. So it's actually it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful service.
I never thought about it that way. Thank you. That makes me feel good.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's healing. It's healing on a certain level.
Laughter is healing.
Laughter is healing. Yeah. Yeah, we tend to remember moments that are funny. That is true. And yet, they say that Jesus never laughed. I don't know if it's true or not. Yeah. But if you think about what laughter is it's what you can't contain. Laughter, or I should say humor, is nothing but a contradiction. Okay? When you're telling a joke, you're kind of going down one particular path, and that builds up electrically in the person. It builds up expectation of a certain type of outcome. And then when you get to the punchline and that expectation gets diverted somewhere else, it creates a friction in the person from where they were anticipating going and where they ended up.
Right.
And that actually ends up being discharged through the moving center in a series of ha 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 kind of waves to get rid of that excess. So maybe Jesus didn't laugh. Maybe he actually was just able to hear a joke and transform it into alchemically transform it. Who knows?
Yeah, I've been watching this series with Morgan Freeman called The Story of God.
Ah,
Um, he, he doesn't just narrate it. He's actually the explorer going around the world and talking with many different people, Tibetan monks, the Sikh, Hindi, um, uh, Catholics, Christians, you name it. And it's absolutely a fascinating docuseries on Netflix if you guys get a chance to watch it. Um, I'm not a very religious person. I wasn't raised in a religion. So I was raised Rosicrucian. But I, it enlightening, seriously. And he talks about that, about the human nature into having faith, and not just faith in a specific religion or organized religion, but faith in oneself and where that comes from and how we apply it in to our own lives, and I thought it was really good. So that's another one you guys could check out.
great. Oh, that's great. Thank you for the reference. Maybe post that one in there too. Just,
Okay.
I don't know. Do you guys, when you log off, do you actually get a history of the chats or anything like that?
You have to click on the little three dots on the right and it says save chat.
Okay, right. Good. All right. Yeah, post that in there, and then yeah, I think it's a good place to wrap up.
Okay.
And,
Wait, don't close yet so I can get it in the chat.
Well, actually, I had a question while we're
Yeah.
waiting. Just a couple of words on the cosmic triangle that was on that list. Just what is it?
Oh, right. I thought you were going to say a couple words on it. I was about ready to be all ears. The cosmic triangle, it has to do with something that we call the law of three, and it's, you mentioned the law of two, but the law of two is actually an aspect of the law of three. It shows up here a certain way, but it's not cosmic in the sense that it's actually part of the triangle wherein there's a positive, negative, and neutral force. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm just trying to remember. I've been exposed to it before.
Yeah, it's been a while then, huh? Okay.
I have one last question. I'm a little confused. So early on in the presentation, you said something about eyes, using the eyes, stop using the eyes. And
Ooh, let me clarify that. It's, yeah,
Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm confused because then it went on to how we're supposed to look at ourselves, and it was all about me and what I need to do. So I'm a little confused.
Sure. Yeah, so the recommendation for the exercise to just try not to use the word I is only to bring your awareness to how often you use it in there, but it's not meant as like a, try this for any more than a couple of hours or a day max, like tops. It's more of a kind of a wake-up call internally, but you're absolutely right in the second part that, and especially the idea of not changing something about yourself for a long time, just observing it. But it can be kind of interesting, right, to see how often we talk about ourselves and how often we call I, me, mine, call things mine. I am a computer scientist. I am a doctor. I am a, no, you're not actually. You're actually not. That's what it does. Right? That's what the lower parts of it does. Maybe not in the terms of a doctor, but that's not what you are. Right? We always say I to everything.
And also, I have a story. I have a story that matches your story. I have a story to understand what you're saying. So I have to tell you my story so that you understand that I do understand what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep. And by the way, Jeff, that goes back to the cosmic triangle. What we just did here was an example of the cosmic triangle from the standpoint of she had a question. right? Lou had a question, and that put her in the positive vector because she needed to transmit that, and I needed to listen to that. So that put me in the negative vector. And then when it moved on is when I attempted an explanation. Now, if the explanation didn't match the question, it would not be able to be neutralized, and it would go back into the positive vector to ask another question and continue on and so forth until it's finally completely neutralized.
Why is the listening a negative vector?
Oh, I mean receptive. I don't mean negative in a good bad context. I mean it as a when you're
Magnetic.
speaking, you're transmitting information or
Receptive.
whatever, and when I'm quiet, I'm receiving it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.